Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. I hope that anyone on here who observed or marked Yom Kippur and the 10 days of repentance and Rosh Hashanah had a meaningful experience. Today, we will be studying the second to last Parsha, Torah portion, Ha'azinu, and I'd like us to think together about the relevance of this Torah portion, not just generally speaking, but in particular at this time of year between Rosh Hashanah, between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, as we near toward the holiday of our joy, as is described in the Torah, as Sukkot is described in the Torah, and as we come out of Yom Kippur. So I'll go ahead and start with some intro notes, and I'll share my screen. Okay, so I think there's some interesting things to note. This is a very short Torah portion. It is only a chapter long. It is a long chapter, but at the end of Deuteronomy, there are a lot of short Torah portions. I noted here that the previous Parsha is only 30 verses. The next Parsha, and I'll say something about that in a moment, is 41 verses, 2 chapters. And that Parsha is not read on a Shabbat, it is read on Simchat Torah, the very last holiday of this season. And so this is the very last Torah portion to be read on Shabbat. So it really feels special to be here with you exploring Ha'azinu. There's a lot of positive and there's a lot of negative in this Torah portion. We'll see some of we're going to focus on the positive, some verses that are beautiful about Torah. And there's a lot of negative that echoes some of the other negative sections of the Torah that address what happens when the Israelites misbehave and how they will be punished. And the selection from today really encapsulates the positive content. And as I mentioned, I want us to consider what is the relevance, not only in general, but to this particular time of year. I want to note, I'll take you very briefly through an outline of the Torah portion, since we're not going to dive into the whole thing, and I will invite you in whatever mode you choose, whether that's on print or on Safaria or somewhere else on the web, to read through the chapter. It is difficult, but worth reading as a whole. So,
sorry to interrupt. Is there a way you can make your screen bigger? It's only in part of the screen.
I can reshare also. I just made it 150%. Okay.
That's great.
Is that 100? Okay, great. Thanks. So the beginning of our Torah portion jumps into a poem, a shirah, a song, and the introduction is in the previous Torah portion and in the previous chapter. So I just want to note that Moses is the speaker. Sometimes Moses represents God in the poem, but it's Moses who delivers the song to the Israelites it's the very last, it's one of the very last sections before Moses prepares to die. And we will start off in the poem with a verse declaring God as perfect. We then transition into God choosing and nurturing Israel. We learn that, of course, Israel does misbehave and will get punished, but God will save Israel. And then there's a conclusion about Moses's death, and also with some final words about taking the Torah to heart. So before I dive into the verses themselves, we'll study a couple verses, and then we'll read a few commentaries, and then we'll do the same thing for a different section. There's a chance we may only get to one section, but I will try for 2. So before I dive in to the verses and the commentaries, I'll take 1, 2, or 3 questions that are brief about where we are in Deuteronomy, where we are, what the general gist of the Torah portion is, and anything general before we dive in to the content. So are there any questions at the moment about general questions about this week's Torah portion and the end of Deuteronomy, the end of Devarim? And if not, we will dive into the verses. Okay, I see Bob Goodstein's hand. So Bob, if you have a brief question, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, real briefly, if this is Moses's song to the people of Israel, the first line of the Parsha, the first two words are Ha'azinu Hashamayim, which is not addressing the people, it's addressing the heavens.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for that. Moses definitely, I'll point out here, just here's the verse from the previous Torah portion. Moses spoke these words, he spoke the song for the entire people. And then we begin Moses's words. Definitely, we can sort of picture someone saying, "Give ear, O heavens, that I may speak." That is Moses speaking. So yes and yes. Any other general questions? I see Esther raising your hands.
And Abby,
Okay,
there were a couple of questions after Esther's question. There were a couple in the chat box, which I can read out loud to you as well.
Okay, so we'll take Esther's and then we'll go to the chat and then we'll continue into the deep dive.
I don't quite agree with the previous speaker because I look at Hashamayim v'ha'aretz as witnesses, Ha'azinu, as witnesses. The Shamayim is our spiritual part and the Aretz is our physical part. And I look at Aretz with the same roots as Ratzon, what we want and what we do. So I connect.
Okay. Yeah, Esther, thank you. That it's a different way of, this is poetry and there's a lot of room for interpretation. And I think what you're saying is fair. The heavens and the earth do serve as witnesses to Moses' speech here. Thank you. Julie, can you, if you don't mind, representing a couple of the things in the chat, and that will be, and then we'll shift gears.
Absolutely. I'll put them out at the same time to you. The first is, why do you think Moses chose a song as a way to communicate to the people? And the second is, how was it possible to transmit this either verbally or in a written form to so many people, such a large group?
Yeah, those are good questions. So the first question about a poem, there are poems throughout the Hebrew Bible. You could take a whole course in biblical poetry. I don't really have an answer to why, but that is a pattern in the Torah. This particular section of the Torah, depending on your perspective, and I will share mine, this poem and a lot of biblical poetry those poems are considered some of the oldest parts of the Hebrew Bible. So some people do think that the Torah was the 5 books, the words of the 5 books were given on Sinai at one time. And there are other ways to look at the transmission of the Torah also, that different parts developed, were written, were passed on orally at different times. So from a more academic perspective, the poems, this particular poem also is dated to, one particular perspective is the 11th century, the 1000s BCE. So it is an old poem. In terms of the question, why did Moses, I would say the question a little differently. Why are words of poetry ascribed to Moses before he dies in his directions to the people of Israel and his final instructions to the people of Israel? And I would say, there's a lot of prose. Moses gives a lot of directions in law. Moses is a lawgiver, but one might say, based on some poetry, he's also a poet. And we know that poetry can have an emotional effect that's different from legal prose, legal writing. So I think it seems appropriate to me that there's this shira, this song, this poem at the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of Devarim, that, and if you read through the whole thing, you'll see some of the powerful metaphors, and we'll look at some of those metaphors today also. I heard the question about transmission. Transmission is a complicated topic with multiple perspectives also. And again, I'll just share two on the opposite ends of a continuum. There are approaches, from a traditional perspective, we don't know how the Torah exactly was given. There are different theories, and different commentators write about how exactly what Moses said and what the people heard. From a more contemporary perspective, transmission is very complex and often begins in oral form, and we don't know a lot about how the library of the Hebrew Bible was transmitted over time. The one theory is that the books of the Torah were edited in their form, in the form that we're familiar with, sometime in the 6th century BCE. That's a different kind of perspective than all the Torah was given at one time at Sinai. Both are in the conversation of Jewish tradition. One is more contemporary, one is older. So a very complex question at the outset of our time together today. Let's shift gears. I see I'm still sharing my screen. I'm going to go ahead and read verse 2 here, and then I want to analyze it with the help of Rashi, an early medieval commentator who died in 1105. I always mix up that date. And I want to analyze what exactly, whoops, there's a double word here. What exactly verse 2 can mean for us today and at this time of year. And you can see I added 2 translations here. So Everett Fox is on the left, and Robert Alter's translation is in the middle. And I'll read in Hebrew and in English. Ya'arof kamatar likli, tizal katal imrati, kisirim ale dashe, v'chir vivim ale esav. Let my teaching drip or drop like rain, my saying or my words flow like dew, like droplets on new growth, or like showers on the green, like showers on the grass, or like cloudbursts on the grass. So my teaching, I want to point out in Hebrew, is here lekach, which means the thing that I have or the thing that I take, translated here by both translators as teaching. So let my teaching or my Torah flow out of the earth or flow from the sky. Let's look at how Rashi understands these verses. Can I ask someone to read Roman number 8, letter A here, Rashi's interpretation of the beginning of this verse, let my teaching drop like rain. Just a short, I see Sheila. Sheila, would you mind reading if you can unmute just in English, the Rashi here?
Can you hear me?
Yep, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let my teaching drop like rain. This is the evidence that you will have to give, that in your presence I declare that the Torah which I gave to Israel is life to the world, as the rain which is life to the world, even as the heavens drop down dew and rain.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sheila. Rashi is saying here something that we may have already intuited, that rain or dew is a life-giving force in the same way that teaching or Torah can also be a life-giving force in our own lives, whether that was in the lives of the Israelites or at least a couple thousand years later in our own lives. Our heritage, our learning, the beautiful literature of the Torah can certainly impact and enliven and add life to our own lives. I'm going to keep going here so that we can get a little bit of a full picture and talk about the various metaphors together. Can I have a reader for letter B here, the second Rashi in this verse, 32:2? Roni, your hand was raised earlier. Would you like, I know you might have had a question. Would you like to read B here, and then maybe you can get in a question a little later.
Sure. And you answered the
Thank you.
question.
Oh, good. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
My sayings flow like dew in which everybody rejoices. God adds this because rain involves annoyance to some people, as for instance, to those on a journey or a man whose the pit into which the wine flows when the grapes are being pressed is full of wine, which thus becomes spoiled.
Okay, thank you. I'll translate here from the English. I want to point out and clarify. So this is right here. This is the quote from the verse, my saying or my sayings flow like dew. And then Rashi adds here, my sayings in which everyone rejoices flow like dew. Rashi is really asking here, what does this mean, flow like dew? And he explains that in the same way, rain or moisture or wetness from the earth, from the sky can be annoying to people. Who can it be annoying to? Well, if you're on a journey, it's not so much fun to be in the rain. And if you're a vinter, if you're a winemaker, Rashi is thought of to be a winemaker. There's been some scholarly debate about that. But for someone who's going through the process of harvesting grapes and making wine out of grapes, if there's a pit and it gets wet, that can ruin the winemaking process. So in the same way that literally the moisture from the earth or the sky can be annoying and can get in the way of our lives, guess what? So too can Torah. Sometimes we hear something from a teacher or we read something in a text that we may not want to hear or that may rub us the wrong way. One might say that it's our job to figure out a way to make that teaching relevant to us. If we see something in our tradition that is difficult, doesn't make sense, again, rubs us the wrong way, maybe there's a way that we can find to make it relevant for us today. And also sometimes the most difficult things are the things we most need to hear. So I think all that, I'm offering an interpretation of Rashi's interpretation. What does Rashi mean when he says his first interpretation is fairly clear. Torah can symbolize life. Many of us have probably heard that before. But the saying that our sayings, that the sayings of the Torah can flow like dew, Rashi is saying, well, let's remember that sometimes our sayings can be things that we hear, things that we learn can be a little bit annoying. And I'm adding here, well, let's find a way to make those things actually sources of joy for us. So I'm going to pause there for a moment. I don't think we're going to do C. And I want to take 1, 2, or 3 comments on these interpretations of what are your reactions to Torah as a life force, and also this idea that sayings from the Torah can be a little bit annoying, and yet it is our job to try and make them as joyous as possible in our lives. What are your reactions? We'll take 1, 2, or 3 comments. Roni, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a question or a comment here? I know you read, but
maybe a life observation. But
okay,
but I think it's beautiful prose. But I think the annoyances, so to speak, are the if Torah is a filter, then the annoyances, whether we like to admit or not, might be the truths that surface to the top, so to speak, meaning that is our purpose is to figure out why it annoys us. It might have, a deeper truth. It might be rooted in a deeper truth. And that can be annoying.
Yes,
that can be
absolutely.
difficult or challenging to figure out. And so that's a nice way to say it.
Yes, thank you so much. Dr. G, I see a hand raised.
I think one of the things that I see with this in terms of talking about the good and the bad is understanding the dichotomy that must exist in the world. If we do not see bad, we cannot all the more appreciate the good. Okay,
thank you. Beautiful. Emmy, I see your hand raised.
Yes, I noticed that many things that were given to the prophets were given in rhyme, and that this heavens drop down dew, I put in the chat about the Maimonides saying about Ruach HaKodesh. It comes down, it descends upon an individual. And so it may be that these sayings are Ruach HaKodesh is being given in this way. The Song of Songs, the Psalms, things that come to us are given sometimes in rhyme.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, I mean, I want to kind of unpack what you're saying try and unpack it briefly. This idea of Ruach HaKodesh, or Holy Spirit, that is a traditional idea that Moses, Abraham, Deborah, that several are the great figures of the Hebrew Bible had Ruach HaKodesh. They had this ability to connect with God, with the divine spirit. And I think, Emmy, what you're saying is there's imagery around those words. What they receive comes down from the heavens. And I think I hear you saying about dew and rain, the image of coming down of words that may be difficult for us to hear, like sometimes the prophets got words that were difficult to pass on. You're making a parallel there, that in the same way the great figures of the Hebrew Bible, perhaps in the same way that Ruach HaKodesh, the divine spirit, is attributed to them, perhaps it's not, you're making a leap to say that we too receive ideas or sayings that descend down to us. Is that correct?
Well, I was referring to Moses's last words here that were coming to him in the form of poetry, which is what we were addressing here, is that how come it comes in the form of poetry. And as it comes, as we know, on the breath comes, and it comes again, and then it comes again, and the words flow in this manner and are received this way on the breath of Ruach HaKodesh. And I wasn't referring to people in our modern day. I'm sure that people may have something, but it wasn't in my mind to do that.
Okay, more so when you're speaking about the biblical figures and their Ruach HaKodesh.
Exactly.
Okay, beautiful, thank you. So we're gonna shift gears. I want us to get in a little bit more text, both from the Torah portion itself and also a little bit more of commentary. So I just want to reiterate what we've said so far, which is, not surprisingly, rain is compared to life and Torah is compared to rain and life. And at the same time, we have this interesting verse about, let me just scroll up so I can put that in front of us for a second, about sayings flowing like dew, in which everyone rejoices, and yet Rashi saying sometimes the things we hear can be difficult or annoying. So I also want us to look at another verse closely, which is verse 7. Can I have a reader for verse 7 in English? Either the translation on the left, adapted from Everett Fox, or the translation on the right. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Linda.
Okay. Remember the days of old, consider the years of ages past. Ask your father, he will inform you. Your elders, they will tell you.
Okay, great. And I'm going to read that in Hebrew also. Zechor yamot olam, remember the days of old. Binu shnot dor vador. And I'll use the middle translation. Give thought to years of times past. Sha'al avicha v'yagedcha. Ask your father that he may tell you. Zikenecha v'yomru lecha. Your elders that they may say to you. So we're going to see what some of the commentators inquire about for this verse, but it seems on the one hand pretty clear. Remember, Moses is finishing up his teaching to the people of Israel, and he's saying, like, remember to ask your elders the meaning of all this. You, a young person, a new generation, might not have the perspective that an older person has. So ask, inquire, be curious. And also there's this idea here, remember the days of old. I want to focus on the teachers in this verse and see what the commentators say, not only earlier about Torah, but also about the teachers of Torah, the fathers, the elders. So Rashi here says, he comments on the father. Who is the father? These are the prophets who are termed fathers, as it is stated in the history of Elijah, that Elisha, Elijah's student, and many people here might be aware, Elijah, one of the most well-known prophets in the Book of Kings. Elisha exclaimed when Elijah departed, when he seemingly died. He has a complicated death story. My father, the chariot of Israel. So Elisha is calling his teacher, his mentor, Elijah, his father. And then Rashi also comments on your elders in the verse, and he says, these are the sages. So there's actually no literal father here, according to Rashi, even though it says father in the verse. Rather, the fathers are our teachers, our mentors, and the elders are our sages. Ibn Ezra, another commentator, Rashi is from France, Ibn Ezra is from Spain. Ibn Ezra died a little bit later, lived and died a little bit later. His death year is here. Ibn Ezra says, Scripture states this because earlier in the verse, it says, remember, if you forgot what your fathers told you, ask them. So here, Ibn Ezra does not question who a father is. The father in the verse is the idea here is that children, young people, a new generation should actually ask their parents. And here's another commentator, Ramban, Nachmanides, Moshe ben Nachman, also from Spain, but he died in Israel. He says, this alludes to those who understand the events of former days. So the first thing he says is, not an elder necessarily, not a mentor specifically, not a prophet, people who have understanding. And in Hebrew, I'll read this phrase, remez le-mevinim v'chein ziknecha. So this refers to those who understand. And then Ramban says, that's your elders. Your elders are generally the people who understand. And I didn't change the English here into newer English, and they will tell you, for they understand the past. So the elders are considered people who understand the past here. I'm gonna keep the share on. Julie, is it okay? Is it more wise? Is it better for people if I stop the share for a few moments?
Or either way.
No? Okay. I'm gonna keep the share on so we can have make sure everybody has the verse in front of us. So here we talked about Torah and Torah being not always positive, but teaching being complex, needing to learn from teaching, sometimes that at first rubs us the wrong way. And now the commentators are saying to us, when we read this verse about remembering the days of old and getting information about the past from whoever is in this verse, our fathers and our elders, really we're talking about sages, people who understand. Sometimes that is a parent or an elder, but teachers come in many different forms. And so in the same way Torah can be complex and come in many different forms, our teachers come in many different forms. I'd like to hear some initial thoughts about this verse and the various kinds of teachers that are read into the verse. Does that resonate with you? What does resonate with you about the roles and the teachers in verse 7? So we'll take up to 3 comments, and we'll start with anyone who has not yet shared.
I think, Abby, there was a question in the chat. Are you asking about the comments with Rashi and Ramban?
Yeah, the verse in general and the comments of the commentators. Thank you. I see David's hand. So Julie, if it's okay, I'll start with that. And then Jenny, and then the comments in the chat. So David, just go ahead and unmute.
Okay. We talked about verse 7, correct?
Yeah, verse 7 and the,
Okay. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of ages past. Ask your father. He will inform you. Your elders, they will tell you. My comment is, in the Shema, it says, Vishidantem levadecha. It means you're, as a parent, you have to carry on by teaching your children. And I think this fits perfectly. Thank you.
yeah. Oh, thank you. Yes. There are verses in Sukkim in the Torah both ways, that parents have to teach their children, and in reverse, that children need to learn from their parents. So David, thank you for reminding us of that duality. Jenny, I see that you have a hand.
What I want is the continuation. When the children of this generation, they understand what is going on, and we can see it with our eyes of what had happened to us lately, especially the hurricane of Fiona and Ian, that just like a water that destroy houses, everything. But light rain will give us life. So life is sustaining and is destroying by water. So that is something that we can learn that from the past, but we can see it with our eyes now. That is my point.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Julie, you mentioned there were some questions or comments in the chat.
Yeah, let me see. I misunderstood one of the questions. It was a response to another comment. Sarah said, it seems to me that the immediate audience, it was literally their fathers, but the elders part is talking to us.
Okay, interesting. That can be one way of looking at it, definitely.
And Shula had a comment.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. Could you go up a little bit in your screen? So we're okay. Remember the days of old, consider the years of ages past. Ask your father, he will inform you, your elders, they will tell you. We could take this as two couplets, right? Remember and consider.
Sure. Yeah.
Ask your father and your elders. I think we should remember that this is poetry. This is not prose. And poetry is different from prose. Poetry frequently repeats. You know, we like language to be a little bit more direct. We don't say, you know, go to your house, your apartment, your abode. But you might say that in a poem because it's lovely to think about it in different ways. So I think that remember the days of old, consider the years of ages past is really two ways of saying the same thing, and it doesn't need to have two different meanings. So too, ask your father, he will inform you, your elders, they will tell you. That can mean the same thing. Your fathers and your elders are the same people, informing and telling you are the same people. It's a reiteration for emphasis, and it is a reiteration for beauty.
So Shula, thank you for your comments. Oftentimes on this Parsha class, inevitably what comes up is the distinction between pshat and drash, between the contextual meaning, the literary meaning, the clear literary meaning that we extract from the text, referred to as the pshat, and our Jewish tradition of drash, of reading into the text. So both are useful. Certainly contextual, a fair literary and historical reading of the text is important. And in Jewish tradition, we also have this tradition of parsing words, of reading into the text. And what I'm doing today is using our commentators to drash, I'm using that as a verb also, to drash on the text. And in the same way that Rashi and Ibn Ezra and Ramban, all these classical medieval commentators read into the text to extract meaning from it, from their own lives, I'm suggesting that we follow in that tradition, and we do that as well to make the text meaningful for us. So on the one hand, you could certainly say, and I love shot reading, and you could certainly say, yeah, like, what's the big deal here? We get at the basic idea of learning from our past, and that Torah is a life force, and it's compared to rain. Beautiful. Great. That could be enough. What I'm doing is using our classical commentators and noticing, oh my gosh, Rashi says that actually Torah should be used to create joy when it actually is annoying. What does that mean for our own lives in 2022? I'm suggesting that it means learning and teaching can sometimes rub us the wrong way and be difficult. And our tradition isn't always the easiest thing to swallow. And I'm offering that here in 2022, at this juncture, especially after Yom Kippur, beginning a new year, beginning a new Jewish year, that we say, like, what is it in our tradition that speaks to us? And not only do we learn from the people that we think of as our teachers, but as our rabbis later on said, one of the most famous rabbinic sayings is, who do I learn from? I learn from everyone. A classical rabbinic text from Pirkei Avot. Who is wise? One who learns from every single person. And a quote that the rabbis used from Psalms, from all my teachers, I have grown wise. And so the rabbis, the medieval commentators, I think they're being playful. They're playful readers. And of course, I would say maybe they knew that the pshat of the text, the general idea was, okay, yeah, we learn from our elders, from our fathers. We don't need to get hung up on it. But they're really noticing here, and in line with other messages, that yes, we might learn from our biological parents. We might also learn from our elders. We might also simply learn from those who understand. And those are people that we might have to look for. Friends, people in teacher roles, whoever it might be. So I will pause for a few more questions after I definitely see your hand, but I'm going to conclude and then give other people the opportunity since you already spoke. In conclusion, at this particular juncture, I hope it's a year we can learn from things that are difficult for us, all of us, and I'm saying this message for myself also, to learn in ways that are sometimes difficult, to push ourselves, and also to learn from all people, from everyone, whether they're in a teacher role or not in a teacher role, whether they're our biological family or someone we think just understands, just gets it. So with that, I will conclude and also take time for, I think we have time for a few questions or reflections. So 1, 2, or 3. I see Rich, so go ahead, Rich. Oh, Rich, I think you need to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
So
okay.
I just want to say a quick comment that I just love the invitation to open that communication between our generation and past generations, and just to ask questions. So that struck me really, really strong. And that was just a comment that I really loved about Torah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Joel? Oh, go ahead and unmute.
I think that for me, Moses is speaking, and Moses knows he's dying. And he's saying, remember the days of old. So what does he want to emphasize? He wants to emphasize his leadership of the people, of taking them out of Egypt in bondage, of leading them to Mount Sinai, the revelation, of taking them towards the promised land. Remember these miracles. Remember God. This is the importance of the whole thing. Remember God and the miracles and my leadership. What I tried to do, like an ethical will. He's saying, remember this wisdom before I die.
Yes, absolutely.
Die here.
Yes, absolutely.
Remember what I'm trying to leave behind, which is wisdom.
Yes, 100%. And the whole book of Deuteronomy, as you know, is Moses speaking to the people of Israel. And it is, these very last chapters are really heartbreaking to read, especially the very end when Moses dies. And you're right, he's not ready to go. And he does absolutely try. You could say this is Moses' ethical will. That's a beautiful framing. Thank you. Bimaya, nice to hear from you. You get the last word.
I was going to say the penultimate comment about bringing in wisdom from elders seemed so timely as we get ready to Sukkot and invite wisdom and our ancestors into the Sukkah. So I just sort of wanted to note that felt like a very cogent way to sort of end as we get ready to think about whose example we want to follow into the new year as we celebrate in the Sukkah. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bimai. It's a beautiful connection to Sukkot. Bimai is referring to the tradition of Ushpizin, to welcome in guests, our ancestors, into the Sukkah. If you Google it, you'll find that there's a few different, sometimes there are posters you can put up in a Sukkah with different guests that you can, our ancestors, that you can welcome in. And what a beautiful, certainly overarchingly, it's hard to, various comments have spoken to Jewish tradition and the role that, I'm going to take it a step further, teaching and teachers and elders have in our tradition, both biological and non-biological. And Bimaya, thank you so much for making the connection to Sukkot. So with that, I will wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and not only a Shabbat Shalom, but a year ahead of Shalom and of complexity and learning from everyone that you can. And also, as Bimaya mentioned, Sukkot is coming up on Sunday night, so I will also wish everyone a joyous Sukkot, a Chag Sameach. And if you didn't get to share a question or comment today and you're eager to do so, I will go ahead and put my email in the chat, and I will try and get back to you as soon as I can. And thank you to everyone for being here, for learning together today, and also for participating.